Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Planning Committee meeting. I'm Liz Schell, Chair of Planning Committee. We have our committee with us, Councillor Neill, Vice Chair, Councillor McLaren, Councillor Osanek. We have a number of city staff with us, our Clerk Thompson, and starting on this side, Manager Vendetti, beside her Planner Sands, City Solicitor Ray, Planner Sifat, and Planner Wicca. So we have a good full house of planners, and I see Councillor Turner is on her way. She's the final member of the committee. I have a notice of collection to read, as I do at the beginning of all planning meetings that have public meetings. Notice of collection. Personal information collected as a result of this public hearing and on the forms provided at the back of the room is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and will be used to assist in making a decision on this matter. All names, addresses, opinions, and comments may be collected and may form part of the minutes which will be available to the public. Questions regarding this collection should be forwarded to the Director of Planning, Building, and Licensing Services. The purpose of public meetings is to present planning applications in a public forum as required by the Planning Act. Following presentations by the applicant, committee members will be afforded an opportunity to ask questions for clarification or further information. The meeting will then be opened to the public for comments and questions. Interested persons are requested to give their name and address for recording in the minutes. There is also a sign-in sheet for interested members of the public at the back of the room. No decisions are made at public meetings concerning applications unless otherwise noted. The public meeting is held to gather public opinion. Exemption to this rule is outlined in Bylaw number 2006-75 to delegate various planning approvals to staff and to adopt certain procedures for the processing of planning applications subject to delegated authority. Council has authorized staff to use discretion in determining if an application can be a combined public meeting comprehensive report to expedite the approval process. During tonight's meeting, the committee will give consideration to a combined public meeting comprehensive report related to 332 Yonge Street. Public meeting reports are provided to inform the public of all relevant information. Information gathered is then referred back to Planning, Building, and Licensing Services staff for the preparation of a comprehensive report and recommendation to Planning Committee. This means that after the meeting tonight, staff will be considering the comments made by the public in their further review of the applications. When this review is completed, a report will be prepared making a recommendation for action to this committee. The recommendation is typically to approve with conditions or to deny. This committee then makes a recommendation on the applications to City Council. City Council has the final say on the applications from the city's perspective. Following council decision, notice will be circulated in accordance with the Planning Act, and anyone with an interest in the matter may file an appeal. Interested persons are advised that if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions before the bylaw is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of council to the Ontario Municipal Board unless, in the opinion of the board, there are reasonable grounds to do so. Thank you. And we have 4 public meetings tonight, so I'm going to open the first public meeting. It's an application for zoning bylaw amendment, 538 O'Connor Drive, and FO10 Consultants will be presenting.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Planning Committee, members of the public and staff. My name is Yuko Leclerc. I'm a land use planner with FO10 Consultants, here representing the owners and the applicant, Cartronic Auto Electric Limited, for a zoning bylaw amendment at 538 O'Connor Drive. So the subject site is located in the city of Kingston's West End. I'm sure you'll all recognize it. It fronts on and is accessed from O'Connor Drive and backs onto Princess Street. It's an area that's fairly commercial. It's surrounded to the north and west sides by commercial and light industrial uses, many of which are automotive in nature. To the east is a hydro corridor, as well as a tributary to Little Cataraqui Creek, and there is also a landscaping business that's within the Cataraqui Estates Business Park. To the south is Princess Street. It's about 5 lanes at that location. And then just to the south of Princess Street is the Royale Retirement Residence. Looking at the specifics of the site, it's an irregularly shaped lot. There is a building currently on the site. It's a one-story building. There is a mezzanine level on the inside, so it's a little bit taller than a typical one-story building. It's a building that serves a few functions for the current business, which is the Kingston RV Center. So the southern portion of the existing building, and I'm try and use the mouse here, is used for for a vehicle showroom. There's offices in there. And then to the north, the northern sort of wing, I guess, of the existing building is where they service vehicles. So there's a service bay in there. Vehicles drive in on the east side, and they can come out as well. The site takes advantage of its location on Princess Street for outdoor display of the vehicles and trailers. There's sort of two different materials. There's pavement, which is sort of that darker material, and then there's a little bit of gravel as well. There is a steep slope that sort of runs diagonally across the site, sort of from the southwest to the northeast. And that's what you see on that image is that sort of grassed area in the middle. That's not suitable for parking or for paving or construction, so it's just kept green on the site. So the intent of this application that's before Planning Committee is just to rezone the site to allow some additional uses that are related and very similar in nature to what's currently permitted. So the current use on the site is the sale and service and display of recreational vehicles and boats and certain types of trailers. So the proposal is to expand that to allow power sports equipment, things like utility vehicles, or all-terrain utility vehicles, personal watercraft, snow machines, and also even a little bit broader is just this vehicle. So it's for the sale and rental and outdoor display and servicing of these types of equipment. There's no change proposed to the existing building. The site itself is also not going to be substantially changed. The only thing that's being introduced effectively is this fence sort of in the northeast corner that's just for security. So there's no change to the grading or to the material on the property itself. From a planning perspective, this property is designated arterial commercial, which is very well suited for this type of use. And I'm just going to quote directly from the official plan here. The arterial commercial, it's intended for uses that require large sites on major roads to display specialized goods outdoors. So this vehicle sales and power sports equipment sales are perfectly suited for this type of designation. And so is the current RV and boat sale and use. So both the existing and proposed uses are consistent with the official plan, and this application is as well. So just to go a little bit into the nitty-gritty on the zoning perspective, it's a site-specific special industrial commercial zone, which allows limited commercial uses as well as the outdoor display of RVs and boats and trailers. What we're proposing is, as I've said, is really just to expand the uses. The performance standards on the site are not being changed at all. So this table just shows the differences between what we're proposing to add. So none of the yard setbacks or lot area, none of those considerations are being affected by this project because there's no change to the site. So we're just looking to add some uses that are very much in the same vein of what's permitted there now, and allow those to be displayed outdoors and serviced on the site. So to sum up, this is an application that is consistent with the provincial policy statement, particularly the economic policies therein, as well as the official plan. There's no site or exterior building alteration proposed, and the uses that are proposed are very similar in both nature and intensity to what's currently permitted on the site. These are appropriate for the existing built form and the area, particularly given the large number of automotive uses sort of on O'Connor Drive. It's very much in the character of the area. And this is a photo of what's there now. If you can imagine, the types of uses that are being proposed is really the same. It's just taking advantage of the same use and just a little bit different. Personal watercraft and snow machines versus RVs and trailers. So that's it for me. Welcome any questions or comments.
Thank you very much. Could we hear from staff, please?
Through you, Madam Chair. Notice was provided in accordance with the Planning Act and to the 120 meter radius to the 16 properties nearby, and we've received no correspondence to date.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Councillor Neill?
Very quickly, just to staff, I'm assuming this would be a variance that's site-specific just for this application on this site. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's correct.
Thank you. Other questions? Seeing none, I'd like to open the meeting to members of the public. Are any members of the public here to ask questions or make comments? Seeing none, and I think the committee has no more questions, then I'd like to thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Madam
And
Chair.
I will close this public meeting. Thank you. And we have a second public meeting tonight. It's an application for zoning bylaw amendment, 1276 Brackenwood Crescent. And you, Ms. Duclos is presenting again. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Planning Committee, staff, members of the public. My name is Yuka Leclerc. I'm a planner, land use planner with Photon Consultants, here to present a zoning bylaw amendment application at 1276 Brackenwood Crescent on behalf of the applicant ER Trout Design. So this is a property that's located in the city's west end. It's in the Catwoods neighborhood. It's a residential area, a lot of singles and semi-detached. That's sort of the predominant character. The property does back onto commercial properties on Midland Avenue. It's in an area that's very well serviced by transit. This was sort of a surprising item for me when I was looking into the site, is that it's serviced by Route 15, which runs a loop from the Cataraqui Center north through Catwoods and then ending at the Cataraqui Center. So the way that the departures are, there's a departure every 30 minutes, but they stagger them. So in one, there's buses loop in one direction and loop in the other. So there's effectively 15-minute service that starts and ends at the Cataraqui Town Center. So we found this to be very, very, very well serviced, comparable to express bus service. And the Cataraqui Town Center is, of course, in a transit hub that can take you anywhere in the city. It's also close to an elementary school, public park, Cataraqui Woods Park, and commercial uses, both on Midland Avenue, but primarily at the Cataraqui Town Center, accessed by bus. So the existing dwelling it's a semi-detached dwelling. It was built around 1994, and I'll circle back to why that's important. There's an existing front yard driveway. So and there's no garage. So this is one of those situations where the driveway exists in the front yard, and it's been long-standing. It's built in, well, 23 years ago, I guess. It's also got a modest front and rear yards, which serve the needs of the residents of the property and are quite typical for this area. So the purpose of this application is to allow a second residential unit in the lower level, in the basement. This is in the area that's a secondary suites pilot project area. However, we'd like to recognize a second residential unit and allow it through a site-specific zone to allow that to continue should the secondary suites pilot project end at some point. So this use will continue. We're also seeking to reduce the parking on the site to one space for the two dwelling units that are proposed, and allow the parking space in the front yard. Recognize it recognize it rather than just allow it to be illegal non-conforming, but to legalize the front yard parking and to restrict the front yard parking to one space. As part of the application, not included in the zoning, but as part of the process, the applicants will be reducing the driveway width to 40%. Right now, there is an existing driveway on the site, and I'll just quickly go back. That driveway is a little bit more than 40% of the lot width, which is not permitted under the current zoning. So the applicants will be reducing that driveway width to 40% of the driveway, and they'll be not necessarily widening the footprint of, if you can see sort of in the center of the site, there is an existing walkway. So the applicants will be widening that walkway in this direction with interlocking pavers or brick. The dimensions that are being proposed, the parking space and the walkway, are very much in line with the accessible parking standards that were just recently approved at 3.7 meters and 1.5 meter aisle. So it's a little bit, the aisle is a little bit wider, the space is a little bit narrower, but collectively it's comparable to that standard. There is no change to the building footprint or massing proposed as part of this application. So the unit that's being proposed in the basement is a one-bedroom dwelling unit. And if you can see on the floor plan here of the basement, the right-hand side is the front of the dwelling and the rear is on the left-hand side. The main access will be to the rear of the house. There's a walkout in that area there. And then you can see the shared laundry, and there is a way of accessing the basement suite from the front through the shared laundry space in the event of an emergency. So it also meets the secondary suite criteria, which means that it's less than 40% of the gross floor area of the house, and it's also less than 90 square meters in area. From a planning perspective, the property is designated for residential use. This allows both the existing and the proposed use. It encourages density increases and intensification in well-serviced areas. Active transportation and transit are generally supported as well in the official plan. The official plan does not allow front yard parking. However, it does recognize that in existing situations, it can be permitted and limited. So in this case, it's being limited to one space. This is what exists, and it won't be allowed to increase in any way. So the OP does account for that situation, and therefore this application is in conformity with the official plan. From a zoning perspective, it's already subject to a site-specific zone, which was applied to the Cataraqui Woods subdivision when it was developed. So we would be proposing a new site-specific zone just for this lot. The site-specific zone would allow the front yard parking for the one space and would reduce the parking ratio to, I guess, 0.5 spaces per unit, or one space for the two dwelling units. There are also technicalities in the zoning that we'd like to address and that we identified through our review with staff, that both the lot area and the lot coverage don't quite meet the zoning standard. So this table shows the provisions that are being relieved. And if I can get a little technical here, the site-specific zone for the Cat Woods neighborhood reduced the lot area requirement for semi-detached dwellings as a function of the two combined lots. So at the time this house was built, it met the zone standard. So the lot area was consistent with the official plan. There was a revision to the parent zone, that's the R2 zone, a little bit later in the 90s, that introduced a minimum lot area requirement for individual semi-detached dwelling unit lots. So this lot did not meet that requirement. So it was legal, and then it became legal non-conforming. So we just be recognizing that through this site-specific zoning. And for that same reason, the lot coverage does not meet the requirement. So it initially was a function of the building on the two combined lots, but because of the way the lots are, they're slightly different in size. This half of the semi-detached dwelling doesn't quite meet the lot coverage requirement. It exceeds it by about 1%. So we would be proposing to recognize those deficiencies. So to sum up, the application is consistent with the provincial policy statement and the official plan, particularly in that it's a secondary residential unit, and those are so strongly supported in these documents. It represents an increase in density and intensification that won't change the building footprint or the building massing. It will result in net improvements to the site by reducing the driveway width, which is currently too wide. And the reduction in the parking provision will support active transportation. It'll require any residents to make use of bicycles or Kingston's transit system. And will continue to meet the functional needs of the site for that reason. So that concludes my presentation, and I welcome any comments or questions.
Thank you very much. And could I hear from staff, please?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, the application was noticed as per the requirements of the Planning Act, and that included 88 public mailouts to the surrounding residents within the 120-meter radius. To date, there has been 0 public correspondence received. That includes telephone inquiries and/or written submissions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Councillor Neill.
Just very quickly, so the driveway as it exists now would be an existing non-conforming use, and either staff or can possibly address that. And is there a curb cut at this time that's the full width of that driveway? Because my concern would be, it looks like a wide enough driveway to squeeze 2 cars in, especially if the widened sidewalk, if there's a curb cut and cars just drive up and park on the sidewalk portion. Perhaps you could address that.
Certainly. So it's not legal non-conforming because it was never in compliance with the zoning. The driveway has always been too wide for what's permitted there. It was just, there's a number of these in this area of the city where the driveways were built originally to be too wide. And it's not in compliance. So it's not legal non-conforming, and they are required to reduce that. The curbs, I believe, are all rollover curbs, so I'm not sure how that works from a permit perspective, from a, I guess, a cut permit perspective. But the lease for the basement suite would not include parking. So tenants would not be allowed to have a parking space. In terms of parking, people are allowed to park on the streets for up to 12 hours at a time. So visitor parking could be accommodated in that way. But there would not be a legal way to park two vehicles in the front.
I represent a downtown district, so I know that there are non-legal ways that people can find parking. So that was why I was asking about the curb cut. Often with it, especially most recently, when we reduce parking, we also ask about bicycle parking accommodation. Is there a logical place for bicycle, either inside or outside, to park?
There is, and if I'm just flipping right back to the site plan here, in the rear this corner, there is a shed which would serve that function. They could also take their bicycles into the unit, but should their bikes be kept outside, there is a nice space for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'd like to open this to members of the public. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak to this application? Seeing none, I would like to thank you for this application again, for the next one. And on that, close this public meeting. And we have a third public meeting, which is an application for zoning bylaw amendment, 346 University Avenue.
Okay, good. Thanks very much. Yes, good evening. My name is Bob Clark. I'm representing the applicant, or the owners for this, for the rezoning application. Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the committee and members of the public. This is an application for an existing multi-unit residential building, 346 University Avenue, immediately south of Princess Street. It's an application for a zoning amendment to address some specific compliance issues. The building that was constructed on this property about 8 years ago ran into some compliance issues when there was some adjustments to the interior of the building to add 3 additional units beyond those which were originally approved. In our original application, we were looking at lot density. We are looking for relief from parking spaces. We're providing a number of bicycle spaces, looking for relief on amenity, and there is a unit in the basement which the owners wish to retain. The zoning bylaw, originally there was an issue with respect to density. That issue has, as a result of changes to zoning, been resolved. The application that you have before you this evening is to recognize 10 units. There were originally 11 units in this building. The proposal is we'll see that reduced to 10 units. The original approval was for 8. There is a unit in the basement, and that unit will comply fully with the building code, principally through the provision of alternate access. The parking, the provision is for 1 space per unit. We're asking for an amendment to recognize 0.7 spaces per unit, which will require 7 spaces to be provided. In the original site plan design, there were 8 spaces provided. There has been a readjustment of that to recognize special needs parking and also to provide for bicycle parking. I'll illustrate that with the site plan in a moment. With respect to bicycle parking, that is a provision that's been added, and we are providing bicycle parking both in the to the rear of the building and also a bicycle rack at the front door to provide for bicycle parking there. With respect to amenity space, there is a requirement for a large amenity space. The property itself is quite restricted in area, and what we're seeking is an amendment to from the 464 square meters to 100 square meters, and that is in conformity with your recent amenity space study. The site plan was originally prepared in 2005 in fully in compliance with the zoning bylaw except for side yard, and there was a minor variance for that. So the variance, if you're looking at the site plan and looking at side yards, there was an original variance for that. This is the site plan, and I do have some large-scale copies of this. Again, the provision is for 7 parking spaces, one of which is special needs, bicycle parking at the rear door of the building, and so the rear is to the, I'll have to figure out on the left side, so the parking is to the rear of the building. There is a provision for a walkway access to the front of the building where there is an access ramp to the front door to provide for handicapped access in that area. As I say, I do have a large-scale version of that if that's of assistance. With respect to the planning documents, the official plan designates this as Main Street Commercial. It's on the Princess Corridor and has excellent access and transit availability. The zoning bylaw was originally a commercial C zone. That has recently been amended to a C4, which makes an exemption specifically for play space, which was a challenge that we looked at originally in trying to provide. So the zoning amendment that we're seeking would be to require 7 parking spaces instead of the 10, to provide for bicycle parking for 10 bicycles, to recognize the existing amenity space, which is an outdoor elevated patio, and to allow the basement unit, which of course will be subject to the building code compliance, which is and has been designed. And there are building layouts, interior layouts, which illustrate that. That's my presentation, and I certainly can make available the large-scale site plans if that's of assistance. Okay?
Yes, that would be great, thank you. Yeah, James can hand them out. Thank you. And could I hear from staff, please?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, public notice for this application was provided in accordance with the Planning Act. 90 properties within a 120-meter radius were notified. Till date, no public correspondence has been received for this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Councillor Neill.
Thank you. Yeah, I understood, but perhaps I'm wrong, that in that kind of historic chronology of this site, wasn't there a committee of adjustment approval at some point, or was it just site plan and zoning approval for 8 units?
There was a minor variance for the side yard requirement, so there was a committee consideration of this application when it was originally constructed.
Okay. I'm just going to quickly go over what I think is the correct chronology of what happened on this site, and staff or you are welcome to correct me if any of my facts are wrong. So 2005, there was a site plan approval for 8 units. 2007, there was committee adjustment, and again, committee of adjustment, we're talking about 8 units, but with a side yard correction. In 2009, I had thought that 12 units were developed. That was my understanding, and counting mailboxes. Was it indeed only 11?
That's my understanding. I did view the site at that time and counted the units. There were 11 and not the 12. The extra mailbox had to do with a mailbox for the owner of the building who didn't reside in the building.
Okay. In 2010, after being told by the city that there were units that were, I'll politely say non-compliant instead of illegal, but there were units that did not comply with the zoning or the site plan. And that sought to legalize the number that were there, 11, 12, whatever the number was. I believe the document says 12 units, but perhaps since then it's become 11. But between 2010 and 2017, it's been on every abeyance list, I believe, that we've received here at planning. Is that accurate from a staff perspective, that chronology that I just spoke of? Yeah. So nothing is existing non-conforming. It's non-compliance non-conforming in its current state. I know you sought a bicycle parking relief in the 2010 document. Is you're now suggesting 10 parking spaces, so you'll be in compliance with the current zoning?
Yes.
Good. And I appreciate that the parking and amenity space, if this was a greenfield, if this was a brand new development on this site, you would be complying with the new parking study, even if it isn't passed yet, and with the amenity space.
Yes.
Yeah. And the cellar dwelling will be brought into full building code compliance.
Yes, it will. We've had an architect assure us that that can be accomplished.
Yeah. I appreciate all of that, I guess. The old 30-year teacher in me hates to reward inappropriate behavior, which is building above what the zoning and the permit states. And how we went basically 8 years from the building, from when you would have got, I assume, the occupancy permit, with it not meeting those standards, I find troubling. I look forward to the comprehensive report to see how I can support this in its present state. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? And I'd like to open the meeting to members of the public. Are there any questions? Mr. Dixon.
Frank Dixon, 495 Alfred, Apartment 2, K7K, 4J4. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Mr. Clark, city staff. I walk by this building quite often, and I've often believed that it's out of pace or style with the community that's been built around it. But there are two large buildings that are planned very nearby, one on the southeast corner of University and Princess, and one on the north side that are now in an OMB stage. And I followed that planning stage carefully. So I'm not so much concerned now as on the height, because it's going to be likely part of a taller neighborhood. But as Councillor Neill explained as well, I'm on the same line of thinking as to how there was a inadequacy issue on what had been approved and what was built that was allowed to be left alone for so long. That does bother me, because if this is one example, there are probably others elsewhere, not necessarily pointing fingers at anyone, but it gets at the process part. the checking of the details and how the site plan work and how the proposal is actually carried out. So I think we have to support it at this stage, because otherwise we're going to be getting into tearing down units and that kind of thing, and I don't think that's productive. Building doesn't look that bad. I've often been curious as to what the height of it actually is, because you have different numbers of stories, maybe in different parts of the building as well. So, been curious about that. Given that University Avenue further south is mainly comprised of student housing that is very dense and nowhere near as attractive as this, and not as up to date in terms of the amenities, you can't really characterize it as being out of place. I actually lived just across the street down one block prior to this being built. So, walk back and forth all the time. You're doing errands or whatever. I do have misgivings as to how we got here, but that's not your fault, and it's looking at the fault of any of the planners who were in the room. It was a matter of maybe the staff not being either having the time to check up on what was actually happening with the project, or details got away from previous committees and staff. So I'm not going to blame anybody in the room, but I do want the process aspect addressed carefully. Thank you.
Thank you. And I guess that goes with Councillor Neill's discussion of the comprehensive report. Are there any other members of the public wish to speak? Any other comments from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation. And I will close our third public meeting and open our fourth public meeting, which is application for zoning bylaw amendment 332 Yonge Street. And it looks like Mr. Keane will be presenting.
Well, good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Committee, public and staff. My name is Mike Keane, and I'm a planner with Foten Consultants. And I'm here tonight to present to you the application at 332 Yonge Street. And this is a zoning bylaw amendment to allow a second unit in a cellar. So this property is located in the Portsmouth neighborhood, and it is an area that is largely small walk-up apartments and row housing. But there's a small stretch right here on Yonge Street that has 3 single detached dwellings. And this is one of those single detached dwellings that is the subject of the application. It's an area that's well serviced by public transit, good proximity to St. Lawrence, to the transit hub. So zooming in a little closer on the house now, it is a single detached dwelling, has a very large rear yard. It's right now it's a single unit, 3-bedroom house, and it's in a zone, it's in a B1 zone, which is a zone that allows multifamily dwellings. But as is consistent with most of the city's zones, there's no habitation allowed in a cellar. So the purpose of this amendment is largely to address that deficiency, and it would also recognize some other existing deficiencies to make them legal. So this drawing's maybe a little bit hard to understand because the new materials are gray. So it's a little bit hard to tell, but where I'm outlining is the house as it exists today, with the street being down at the bottom and the existing driveway. So the existing driveway, the plan is that that driveway would be shared to allow 2 vehicles access to the backyard, and it would also serve to provide pedestrian access to the basement unit from the rear. And there's also a small garden shed outlined here on the property. So in terms of what's proposed, one thing that's actually already occurred to improve the driveway situation is the old chimney, the old style furnace that had a big chimney up the side has been removed to make a clear pathway right through the property so that there would not be required to gain some land from a neighbor for appropriate access. So some of the general improvements have actually already occurred to the property. And ultimately, the driveway would allow just 2 vehicles into the rear, and leaving most of the backyard in its current natural state. So as I mentioned, the main floor unit was a 3-bedroom unit, and the intention is to turn the basement into a 2-bedroom unit. So again, using my cursor on the screen, the access to the apartment is from the rear of the house, and there will be this common area that both units will use to have access to the shared laundry. So the entrance to the unit is interior, and you'll walk into your main entry and closet, and then further into the kitchen with bedrooms on either side. So the property's designated residential, and largely similar to the other presentations you've heard tonight. It's an area that would allow for the existing use and the proposed use. And the intensification that's occurring here is quite small scale in a serviced area. It's infilling in a house that honestly probably those 3 houses should be another apartment. So a little bit of intensification in this area is quite appropriate. So as a result, the proposal conforms to the official plan. So the zoning B1 in this area allows for the multifamily dwelling, and what we need to request is allowing habitation in a cellar, because the basement, it's very close to being a basement, but it's not quite 50% above grade. And we actually, in the zoning, need a slight bump in the density and relief from lot width. These are all existing situations that I'll show you on the next table. So the minimum side yard width is for a 1-story dwelling is supposed to be 1.8 meters, but the house already built is 1.1 meters. Lot width in a B1 zone is supposed to be 18 meters, again, largely anticipating a much larger dwelling on a site. And these single detached lots are a little smaller, so this is a 16.5 meter lot. And incredibly, even though it's a very large lot, when we put 2 units on it, we are a 1/2 point above the density that's allowed. So we need to request relief from 30 units to 30.5. And then there's the addressing the cellar. And then finally, you'll see that the accessory dwelling can be no closer than 1.8 meters from a main dwelling, and the existing shed is 1.2. So it still meets a safe distance, and so we're requesting relief so that the shed doesn't have to be relocated. So in terms of the application overall, there's a very minor increase in density that really doesn't significantly change anything. The building, the massing remains as you see it today. As a result, the application's consistent with both the provincial policy statement and the official plan. And the primary intent of this bylaw is to allow a dwelling unit in the cellar with those other reliefs needed to recognize existing situations. And I know this matters before the planning committee tonight. It's my opinion it's consistent with the city's policies, and I'm pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Could I hear from staff, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, 60 properties within a 120-meter radius were provided public notification in accordance with the Planning Act. No public correspondence has been received on this application till date. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Councillor Neill.
Yeah, just very briefly. I totally support the idea of secondary suites, as you're probably aware. But I'm always curious. This will be a totally new build. There isn't an existing secondary suite that you're trying to bring into compliance, is it?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's correct. The interesting story here, you'll notice that my applicant is actually my client's lawyer, as he was trying to shelter himself for whatever reason. So this is a property that he has bought to assist the yacht club. Then there's no dwelling in the basement. It's a basement, and it's a clean conversion for a change, not me here asking you, begging you to legalize something.
I appreciate that. And I'm also, as you're aware, always a little reluctant about same day voting for something when the public meeting, but in having heard that there weren't any neighborhood concerns expressed, I'm in support of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Members of the public? Mr. Dixon?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm also supporting this, but I do have one question around the difference between the cellar and the basement and how it applies to this particular unit. I know that there is a distinction between the two, even though the eye may not see something. So it's a matter of a few centimeters that we're talking about here, and you're planning to install 2 additional windows to make up for the shortfall in light access, as I understand it. Maybe you could just get that detail. Thank you.
Well, through you, Madam Chair, a basement in the city of Kingston is described as a space that is at least 50% above grade. And as I noted in my presentation, this is very close. I haven't done precise measurements other than to tell you that it's not 50% above grade. 4 feet is below, and or 4.5 feet is below, and 3.5 is above. I had enough information from the client to distinguish that it was a cellar. Otherwise, this actually would have been an application that complied because of its multifamily zoning that already exists. So the windows that are proposed are very close to full-sized windows, which you probably can't quite read those dimensions, but it's like the smaller windows are 32 inches by 34. And then most of the windows are 32 by 34, and there are a couple larger that are like 42. So, roughly like 3 feet by 3 feet windows. So it's going to go a long way to make this cellar feel more like a basement apartment than like something that has the window wells with the windows cut out of it. The windows will actually be pretty much flush with the ground.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. I will close this public meeting. And I will now open the regular committee meeting, call the meeting to order, and ask for approval of the agenda. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Osanek. All those in favor? Thank you. Confirmation of the minutes, Thursday, April the 6th. Moved by Councillor Neill, seconded by Councillor Turner. Errors, omissions, questions? All those in favor? Thank you, that's carried. Disclosure of pecuniary interest? None. No delegations, briefings, and we do have the business item that we just had the public meeting on 332 Yonge Street. And there is a recommendation from staff. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Osanek. Any comments? All those in favor? Thank you, that's carried. We have no motions, notices of motions, other business. There was no correspondence. And our next meeting is May the 4th. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Osanek, Councillor McLaren. All those in favor? Thank you. Great.